In World War II, General George S. Patton was feared by the enemy, admired by his soldiers, and loathed by many of his own allies. He crushed German armies at a pace few commanders could match, but his greatest battles were not always fought against the Wehrmacht. They were fought inside Allied headquarters, where politics, pride, and personal grudges threatened to end his career, just as victory hung in the balance. George Smith Patton Jr. did not emerge from World War II by accident. He was forged long before the first shots were fired, shaped by lineage, belief, and an unshakable conviction that war was not to be managed but dominated. Born into a family steeped in military tradition, Patton absorbed the mythology of cavalry warfare from childhood. He believed history favored bold commanders, decisive movement, and the will to attack. In an age rushing toward mechanization, Patton carried the soul of the horse soldier into the era of steel and engines. By the late 1930s, as armies across Europe tested tanks and combined arms, Patton embraced the machine not as a replacement for tradition but as its evolution. To him, armored warfare was cavalry reborn, faster, louder, deadlier. Speed was everything. Hesitation was failure. Discipline, in Patton's mind, was not merely order but moral force, the pressure that broke enemies before bullets ever did. He drilled his men relentlessly, demanded immaculate appearance even in the desert, and cultivated an image as sharp as his doctrine. The ivory-handled pistols, the polished helmet, the explosive speeches were not vanity alone. They were psychological weapons, aimed at his own troops as much as the enemy. That philosophy found its proving ground in North Africa in 1942. During Operation Torch, the Allied invasion of Vichy-controlled territories, Patton commanded U.S. forces landing in Morocco. While the campaign exposed painful weaknesses in the inexperienced American army, it also revealed something else: Patton's instinct for rapid maneuver warfare. He pushed units forward aggressively, reorganized shattered formations, and emphasized momentum over comfort. After the U.S. defeat at Kasserine Pass, it was Patton who was sent to restore discipline to the II Corps. He imposed strict standards, reorganized command structures, and reintroduced offensive spirit. Within weeks, American forces were back on the attack. To Allied planners, Patton quickly became a paradox. On the battlefield, he was a solution, an aggressive commander capable of seizing initiative and exploiting enemy weakness. To politicians and senior commanders, he was a risk. Patton openly scorned caution, despised what he saw as bureaucratic paralysis, and believed that war rewarded audacity above diplomacy. He had little patience for coalition politics, public perception, or the moral sensitivities of a global alliance fighting under intense scrutiny. Yet results were difficult to ignore. Patton won, and he won quickly. His operations moved faster than headquarters planning cycles, faster than press officers could frame narratives, faster than political leaders could anticipate consequences. With every success, his legend grew, and so did unease among those tasked with controlling not just armies, but the story of the war itself. Patton was becoming the Allies' sharpest weapon, and like any weapon forged for shock and impact, he was increasingly hard to sheath. By the summer of 1943, the Allied war machine had gathered momentum, and its next objective lay across the narrow waters of the Mediterranean. Sicily was the gateway to southern Europe, and Operation Husky, launched on July 9, was designed to crack it open. More than 160,000 Allied troops came ashore in the opening landings, supported by thousands of ships and aircraft. Among them was Lieutenant General George S. Patton Jr., commanding the U.S. 7th Army, a force initially assigned a limited supporting role on the island's western flank. Patton did not intend to remain in the background. As the landings unfolded amid high winds and scattered drops, he moved with characteristic urgency, pushing his units inland and seizing opportunities before they could be debated away. While Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery's British 8th Army advanced up the eastern side of Sicily toward Messina, Patton redirected his forces westward and then north, launching a rapid drive across the island. Palermo fell on July 22, delivering a major port intact and shattering Italian resistance in the west. From there, Patton turned east again, racing along Sicily's northern coast in a relentless pursuit. The numbers were staggering. In just 38 days, the 7th Army covered more than 1,000 miles of rugged terrain, fighting through mountains, narrow roads, and determined German rearguards. Patton's columns relied on speed, aggressive reconnaissance, and constant pressure. He drove his commanders hard, demanding movement at all hours, often appearing unannounced at the front to push stalled units forward. On August 17, 1943, American troops entered Messina mere hours before British forces, sealing Patton's claim to a dramatic operational success. But victory carried a cost. Beneath the public image of Allied unity, tensions between Patton and Montgomery sharpened into open rivalry. Both men were fiercely ambitious, and each believed his approach was decisive. Patton resented what he saw as Montgomery's caution and preferential treatment, while British commanders viewed Patton as reckless and politically volatile. Sicily had become as much a contest of egos as of armies. Then came the incidents that would eclipse the campaign. In August 1943, Patton struck 2 American soldiers in separate field hospitals, men suffering from what was then poorly understood as combat fatigue. To Patton, exhaustion without visible wounds looked like cowardice, a violation of the discipline he believed essential to survival in battle. But the war was changing, and so was the understanding of its psychological toll. When word reached Allied headquarters, the reaction was swift and severe. Supreme Allied Commander Dwight D. Eisenhower faced an impossible calculation. Patton was delivering results, but his behavior threatened morale, public support, and coalition cohesion. Eisenhower ordered Patton to apologize and removed him from frontline command. The reprimand was kept quiet at first, but within Allied circles, the damage was unmistakable. Patton was sidelined, his reputation tarnished, his future uncertain. Inside headquarters, arguments simmered. Some officers insisted Patton's brilliance outweighed his flaws. Others warned that he was a liability too dangerous to unleash again. For the first time in the war, the question was no longer how fast Patton could win, but whether he could be trusted to command at all. He had survived German fire across Sicily. Now he faced a different threat, one that came from within his own alliance. By the spring of 1944, George S. Patton, Jr., was no longer leading troops in battle. Officially, he had been given another chance. In reality, he had been placed in exile. After Sicily, Allied commanders could not risk Patton's temperament in front of cameras or coalition partners, yet they could not afford to discard him either. What followed was one of the most ironic assignments of the war. Patton was put in command of an army that did not exist. The formation was called the 1st United States Army Group, FUSAG, a massive force supposedly assembling in southeastern England. On paper, it included entire corps, armored divisions, and supporting units. In truth, it was a ghost. Its tanks were inflatable rubber, its aircraft were wooden decoys, and its camps were carefully staged illusions. Radio operators transmitted a constant stream of fake orders and movement reports, meticulously crafted by Allied intelligence. All of it was part of Operation Fortitude, the deception plan designed to mislead Germany about the timing and location of the Allied invasion of Western Europe. At the center of this phantom army stood Patton. To German intelligence, his presence meant everything. The German High Command, the Oberkommando der Wehrmacht, had long studied Patton's record in North Africa and Sicily. Adolf Hitler himself believed Patton was the Allies' most dangerous field commander, the one most likely to lead the main blow. German planners concluded that wherever Patton was, the real invasion would follow. And Patton was in England, facing the narrowest stretch of the English Channel, the Pas-de-Calais. The deception worked. As Allied forces prepared to land in Normandy in June 1944, German intelligence remained convinced the Normandy landings were a diversion. Powerful German formations, including elements of the 15th Army, were held back near Calais, waiting for Patton's non-existent army to strike. Even weeks after D-Day, German commanders hesitated to redeploy these units, fearing Patton's attack was still coming. Inside Allied headquarters, the irony was unmistakable. Patton, sidelined and silenced, was shaping the battlefield more effectively than many active commanders. His reputation alone had become a strategic weapon. Eisenhower and his staff understood this clearly, even as they kept Patton out of public view, restricting his movements and monitoring his statements. He was forbidden from giving speeches, interviews, or any hint that the ruse was false. For Patton, the assignment was a test of restraint he found almost unbearable. He trained obsessively, inspected units that would never fight, and waited. He wrote bitterly in his diary about being wasted while others prepared for glory. Yet the role demanded discipline of a different kind, silence instead of speed, patience instead of attack. As the Normandy invasion unfolded, one truth became clear. The Allies were winning precious time because the enemy feared a general who was not even fighting. Patton had become a phantom, an illusion that held entire German armies in place. The question now was no longer whether Patton mattered. It was whether the Allies would dare to release him before the war's momentum slipped beyond their control. By late July 1944, the illusion had served its purpose. With the Normandy beachhead secured and German defenses cracking under relentless pressure, Allied commanders faced a new reality. The war in France demanded speed. On August 1, 1944, George S. Patton, Jr., was finally unleashed. The Third United States Army was activated, and within hours, Patton was doing what he had been restrained from doing for nearly a year, driving forward without pause. The breakout from Normandy transformed the campaign. As Operation Cobra shattered German lines near Saint-Lô, Patton poured his forces through the gap. Armored divisions fanned out across western France, exploiting collapsed defenses and severed communications. In days, Third Army columns were advancing up to 50 miles a day, a tempo rarely seen in modern warfare. Towns fell in rapid succession. German units, already battered and disorganized, were encircled and overwhelmed. By early September, Patton's forces had captured hundreds of thousands of enemy soldiers and destroyed entire formations that could no longer maneuver or retreat. Patton's method was brutally simple. He emphasized constant pressure, aggressive reconnaissance, and rapid exploitation. His corps commanders, men like Troy Middleton and Walton Walker, were encouraged to think independently and act decisively. Tanks, trucks, and artillery moved day and night, often bypassing strongpoints to strike deeper targets, but speed came at a price. Fuel consumption soared. Ammunition stocks dwindled. Supply lines stretched thin across devastated roads and wrecked rail networks. The logistical crisis ignited a strategic confrontation at the highest level. Supreme Allied Commander Dwight D. Eisenhower faced competing demands. Patton argued that his Third Army could end the war in the West if given priority fuel and supplies. Instead, Eisenhower chose a broad front strategy and shifted resources north to support Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery's Operation Market Garden, an ambitious airborne and armored thrust into the Netherlands. Patton's advance slowed, not because of German resistance, but because his tanks ran dry. Inside Allied headquarters, tempers flared. Patton openly criticized what he saw as hesitation and misallocated effort. He believed momentum was being squandered, that the enemy was being given time to recover. His frustration spilled into private remarks that unsettled his superiors. Patton spoke bluntly about the coming post-war world and warned that the Soviet Union, then an ally, would become a future adversary. At a moment when coalition unity was essential, such statements were politically explosive. The fear surrounding Patton was no longer centered on his ability to fight. On the battlefield, he was delivering results at a scale few could match. The concern was what he might say, and when. Eisenhower and senior commanders worried that Patton's unfiltered views could fracture alliances and undermine strategic cohesion. As Third Army idled for fuel and arguments raged in headquarters, the front lines quieted. And in that pause, deep within Germany's battered command structure, plans were forming. The enemy Patton had nearly broken was not finished yet. While Allied leaders debated, Germany prepared one final, desperate gamble. In December 1944, winter settled heavily over Western Europe, and with it came Germany's last, desperate gamble. On December 16, under cover of fog and snow, Adolf Hitler unleashed a massive counteroffensive through the Ardennes forest. Elite German armored formations, panzer divisions rebuilt in secrecy, smashed into thinly held Allied lines. American units were overrun, supply routes severed, and a deep bulge driven into the front. For a moment, the Western Front teetered. At Allied headquarters, shock turned quickly to calculation. The German thrust threatened Antwerp and the cohesion of the Allied advance. Reinforcements were needed immediately, and they had to move fast. That moment belonged to George S. Patton, Jr. Patton had anticipated the possibility of a German counterattack weeks earlier. At a commanders' meeting on December 19, he stunned the room by announcing he could pivot his entire Third Army north to meet the crisis within days. Many doubted it was possible. Third Army was engaged in operations toward the Saar, facing east. Roads were icy, fuel was scarce, and winter storms grounded air support. But Patton had already prepared contingency plans. In less than 48 hours, he executed one of the most remarkable operational maneuvers of the war. 3 corps, hundreds of thousands of men, thousands of vehicles, tanks, and artillery pieces were rotated nearly 90 degrees and sent racing north through snow-choked roads. Traffic control units worked around the clock. Engineers cleared bottlenecks. Supply officers rerouted fuel and ammunition on the move. It was chaos, but it held. The immediate objective was Bastogne, a vital road junction surrounded by German forces. The 101st Airborne Division, isolated and under constant attack, was running low on ammunition and medical supplies. On December 26, 1944, spearheads of Patton's 4th Armored Division broke through German lines and reached the town. The siege was cracked. Momentum began to shift. Patton's Third Army did not stop there. Through January 1945, his forces continued to grind down German units in bitter winter fighting, pushing them back across the terrain they had so recently seized. Losses were heavy on both sides, but the German offensive was broken. The Western Front, once in crisis, stabilized, and then resumed its advance into the heart of Germany. The effect on Patton's standing was immediate. His performance during the Battle of the Bulge silenced many critics within the Allied command. The speed, foresight, and execution of Third Army's maneuver became a case study in operational brilliance. Once again, Patton had delivered when the stakes were highest. Yet unease remained. Even as victory in Europe drew closer, Allied leaders worried about what came next. Patton's aggressive instincts, so effective in combat, clashed with emerging plans for occupation, reconstruction, and political balance in a defeated Germany. The war was entering a new phase, one where restraint and diplomacy would matter as much as battlefield success. The irony was unavoidable. The general who had helped save the Western Front was still seen as a potential liability in the peace to come. Patton had redeemed himself in the snow of the Ardennes, but his personal battle with authority, politics, and consequence was far from over. The war was nearing its end. For Patton, the most dangerous phase was yet to come. In May 1945, the war in Europe ended in ruins and silence. Nazi Germany surrendered unconditionally on May 7, its cities shattered, its armies destroyed, its regime erased from power. For George S. Patton, Jr., victory did not bring peace. It brought scrutiny. As the guns fell quiet, the battlefield that now mattered was political, and Patton was dangerously out of place. Assigned as military governor of Bavaria under the U.S. Third Army's occupation zone, Patton approached the aftermath of war with the same blunt force he had applied to combat. He viewed Germany through the lens of a soldier who had fought its armies, not as a statesman tasked with rebuilding a society. His public comments soon alarmed Allied leadership. Patton criticized the process of denazification, arguing that removing large numbers of former Nazi Party members from administrative positions was impractical in a country where party membership had been widespread. In one interview, he compared Nazi Party members to political factions in the United States, a remark that landed with explosive force in a world still uncovering the scale of German atrocities. The reaction was swift. Senior American commanders, already wary of Patton's lack of restraint, moved to limit his influence. He was relieved of his post as military governor in September 1945 and reassigned to command the U.S. 15th Army, a largely administrative formation tasked with compiling battle histories. It was a quiet ending for a man whose career had been defined by motion, pressure, and noise. Once again, Patton found himself sidelined, not for failure in war, but for his inability to adapt to peace. Just months later, on December 9, 1945, Patton was severely injured in an automobile accident near Mannheim, Germany. His staff car collided with an army truck at low speed, but the impact broke his neck. Paralyzed and bedridden, Patton developed complications and died on December 21 at the age of 60. He was buried in the American Military Cemetery in Luxembourg, among the soldiers he had commanded in battle. History has wrestled with Patton ever since. To his admirers, he remains one of the most brilliant field commanders of the 20th century, a master of operational maneuver whose instincts repeatedly delivered results when speed and aggression were required. His Third Army's record, from France to Germany, stands as one of the most effective sustained advances of the war. To his critics, Patton embodied the dangers of unchecked militarism, a man whose worldview was too rigid, too confrontational, to fit the fragile demands of post-war order. Patton's life exposed a central paradox of World War II. Total war demanded commanders willing to break enemies without hesitation. Peace demanded restraint, diplomacy, and moral sensitivity. Patton excelled at the first and struggled with the second. The Allies defeated Nazi Germany through overwhelming force, but they struggled to manage one of their most effective warriors when the fighting stopped. In the end, George S. Patton Jr. was never defeated by the enemy he trained his whole life to destroy, but by the war fought behind closed doors.